Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. There's never a day off in the world of Tottenham. Quite frankly, never a day off. If you're for the first time, you can find us on iTunes or on Spotify or across all major audio platforms. We are building up to a huge game for Tottenham Hotspur in the Champions League. Critical games ahead. And obviously on the eve of that, there's been a lot of talk and noise as to whether Thomas Frank should be the Tottenham Hotspur head coach. Well, it appears as things stand, he's going to be. Listen, helping us understand where we are on Thomas Frank's future, concerns over the player dissatisfactions around Spurs at the moment, and what simply comes next in the soap opera, the crisis that is Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. Before we bring in our wonderful returning special guest, back around 2 years after he told me he's retired and never coming back from the show, I'm still bringing him back where and if I can. It is the superb Matt Hayes back alongside me. Matt looking better than ever. I hope my mummy's saying that. While Spurs are still Spurs. Matt, how are you? And it's a joy to have you back alongside me.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure to be back, Ricky. And I think you can liken me to that group of Manchester United players that will always serve the club because of Fergie. If they get that call from Fergie, they'll say yes. And if I get that call from you, it's always going to be a yes as well. But also, I think it's the perfect day for this to happen because I've been a five-a-side. I've busted my ankle. I've taken 2 mitre balls to the face. And I think if that doesn't sum up Tottenham's season, I don't really know what else will. But I'm looking forward to a good chat with Martin tonight.
Absolutely. And look, a joy to have this man back on the show. Regular returning journalist here, Tottenham Hotspur correspondent, a man that we've had good times with. He's going to probably say more bad times with on this show in the past 5, 6, 7 years that we've had him on here. We've got the wonderful journalist who you are starting to hear once again in those press conferences. Maybe thought he was going to get a break away from this. He's being dragged back in like all of us, but he's seeing Thomas Frank face to face. But for how many more times? We've got the superb Martin Lipton back alongside us. Martin, lovely to have you here. Apologies for putting you even through more pain of talking Tottenham.
Well, it is like a self-help book for idiots, isn't it, really, at the moment? You know, what madness possesses us to go through this. Nevertheless, we shall try to disinter the remnants of the season. It does look like sort of the scrappings of a graveyard at the moment, which the crows have left behind, but we will try to find some chink of light amidst the darkness.
We'll try. I mean, look, at the moment, it's hard to see any kind of light at the end of a tunnel. And like Ange Postecoglou famously said last season, every time you feel like you're seeing a light, on comes another incoming train. It feels like that with Tottenham daily at the moment. Look, we're in for listeners on audio, a massive game in the Champions League for Tottenham, likely to be played out in front of thousands of empty seats with a dozen of players out and a manager taking charge who it feels all but has been sacked, and fans really in the dark about what comes next. It's the life of a Tottenham fan. And, you know, I think, again, you look back at this last week or so, you've had one of the most shameful results, can you say, in Spurs' recent history. Thomas Frank, probably, I would say, the most unpopular manager that I've ever known during my time supporting this football club, rightly or wrongly. Obviously, that defeat to West Ham was Tottenham's 5th home league defeat of the season. It leaves on a run of 2 league wins from the last 13. They've taken 2 points from 4 league games, all against nominal, easier opposition, you'd say, in 2026. I know, Martin, you did a piece last night for us where you said Frank was on the brink of an exit. I think many would just love to know from you, how is Thomas Frank still the Tottenham Hotspur head coach heading in to this game this evening for listeners on audio against Borussia Dortmund in the Champions League? Enlighten us if you can.
Well, I think it's for want of an alternative more than anything else. That the mood has hardened. The mood on Saturday amongst the supporters was pretty abundantly clear. There is no way back for Frank. It felt to me, I felt sorry for him because he looked like he was just lost. The sort of the look on his face when that ludicrous West Ham winner goes in was one of desperation and shock and fear and pity and everything combined. The reaction of the supporters, understandably, was brutal. And even the people on the board who don't tend to recognise the bloody obvious, have recognised, it seems to me, what is evident to everyone. That sadly, and I really mean this, because I thought he was going to be a really good appointment. I've got huge regard for him as a bloke. I really like what he did at Brentford. I thought he'd do a good job. It ain't working, and it ain't going to work. It's as simple as that. There's no pleasure in saying this. There's no delight. There's no joy in my life. You know, I wanted to be proven right, but I've been proven wrong by events. It isn't happening. It's not going to work. The powers that be are aware of that. And I think if this game had been Wednesday rather than tomorrow, he probably would have gone. But it is tomorrow. I can't imagine any situation in which Thomas Frank is the manager by the time Spurs play Burnley on Saturday. I simply cannot see it. And therein lies the reality. Making him take charge of this game tomorrow feels like a public execution, because they know what's going to happen. Before the game, the mood will be toxic. That's as good as it's going to get. When the fourth Dortmund goal goes in, you can imagine the demand for blood. It's going to be horrible. And I genuinely think, given there seems an inevitability about the end game here and the outcome, that it's wrong to make him go through it on a personal level. But that's the decision they appear to have made. And I said, I can't see any way in which it lasts. It's not going to last this week. It's a mess. And Frank isn't the only reason for the mess. The mess is bigger than that. The mess is a club that at the moment feels rotten from top to bottom. There's no thought processes in place that have any sort of cohesion or coherence. There's nobody, it seems to me, who knows what decisions they're making. Everybody's looking out for themselves and looking to pin the blame elsewhere. And that's the board and that's the players. And the poor guy in the middle is the manager, who's getting absolutely stuffed royally by everybody. But he is the manager. And as US presidents in the past said, the buck stops here. And it stops with him. And he, therefore, has to carry the can for what has been already an abomination of a season. And in any other season, Spurs would be absolutely desperately fighting for survival, and he would have gone already. The lucky thing for him is that they got those points early on. There are three teams who probably are going to struggle to get 30 points between them, or it's only each. And therefore, one more win or two or three draws probably is enough to keep Tottenham up. That should never be an acceptable position, given the size of the club, the wages, the income stream for Tottenham Hotspur. It's as simple as that. And it's a real shame. But sometimes you've just got to cut your losses. And there's no way back. There can't be. And I'd have done it before with no pleasure. I'd have done it today or Sunday or Saturday. It has to be. It doesn't mean that there's an obvious alternative. I'm not sure there is. You probably have to give it, bizarrely, to the bloke he only brought in last week, Heitinger, to get it to the end of the season, unless you can find someone else who wants to take it. Anyone who's any good is not going to want the job now in case they get a better offer in the summer. So it will be sticking plaster for as long. And perhaps that's why it's gone on as long as it has, because of a recognition that it was only ever going to be for one season. It was never going to go beyond that. And they were hoping to get deeper into the season. But it's now got to the point where the decision has to be made, and that a change has to come just to ensure they get those 2 wins or 6 or 7 points to make sure they stay up.
I'd like to go a bit deeper into that point, because the way you phrased it at the start there, as you said, he's still in the job for want of an alternative. There is no other option, and for me that really raises questions about the series of events behind the scenes that has led us to this point. Because from someone who doesn't have that insight into what's going on at the board, the way the tide has turned in the reporting that we're seeing since that West Ham game, it seems as though up until West Ham they weren't even considering dismissing Frank. And then there's one game, admittedly the most embarrassing game of his tenure and the most embarrassing defeat, but it seems that it's gone from one game of he's not going to be sacked to he has to be sacked do we know the sequence of events and also the kind of the people pushing either side of this argument at board level?
Well, it's a little bit like that thing about bankruptcy, which, starts slowly and ends very quickly. And, straws and camels' backs spring to mind as well. Everyone supports until the moment they don't support. And I'm guessing here, but it feels that the sheer scale of the backlash on Saturday was the tipping point moment, that suddenly people looked around and realised. And I thought for a while that these two games against West Ham and Burnley would be the end if he didn't get 4 points. Well, he's obviously not going to get 4 points now. And to be honest, if he was in charge on Saturday, I don't think those players care enough to get anything at Burnley. I mean, a lot of it is on them. I've got to be honest. Yes, he is the one who should be cajoling and inspiring and getting them to play better. But there was a moment to me on Saturday that summed it up. It was actually in the first half, where one of the few decent moves ended with Porro playing in a low cross from the right, which Kolo Muani didn't get close to. Keeper gathers. And Porro spends the next 10 seconds moaning about the fact that no one's got on the end of his cross, and doesn't even get close to the halfway line as West Ham break and have their left winger all on his own against nobody. And Romero desperately has to heave across to see the ball out. And it's those sort of things where, Porro's an experienced player. He's got a job to do. He's not doing it. Too many of those players are only out for themselves. They are incredibly selfish, I think, and they don't care. They want the laurels of glory. They don't want to put in the hard work that makes that possible. At the same time, there's no excuse in a midfield that can be bypassed by simple passes time and time and time again. There's no excuse for, the poverty of imagination in possession that we've seen throughout the season, particularly at home. It's miserable. I mean, there are games when I've sort of started counting the amount of back passes from halfway and got to double figures far too quickly and stopped. It's just that's the manager's inability to make them brave as well. And I think eventually this just becomes an accumulation of frustrations and issues. And it reaches that point where it's impossible not to see it anymore. Now, you may argue that the board should have seen it far earlier, but of course you want to give the manager time to get it right. I mean, they could have blamed it all on Daniel Levy and not taken responsibility and say he wasn't our man, and they've chosen not to do that. And in some regards, that's the right thing. If and when Frank goes this week, he can't say he's not had enough time to make his imprint on the team. The trouble is that if there is an imprint, it's that they get worse every week. And that's quite a depressing, but I think honest assessment of what's gone on. And so we're now to the position where the board appear to have recognised what's blindingly obvious, that it isn't going to work, and that if you can't get rid of the entire squad, and you can't, not there's much of a squad there at the moment, you've got to get rid of the manager and hope that sparks a change. What I would say, and I genuinely mean this, is that this is not the last time we will see, when he goes, Thomas Frank in the Premier League. This is not and I do think he will be a successful manager elsewhere.
Agree.
It just hasn't worked at Tottenham. This is not, for me, like Nuno, which I knew was a bad appointment. I couldn't ever see it working, and the quicker it ended, the better. This one just hasn't worked, and that's a shame. But that is evidently the case, and you can't. The body language of the players, the way they've treated him, the way they've acted towards him publicly, is indicative of certain of them who have no respect for the manager for whatever reason. And that's on them, but it's also on him, because it's his job to make them listen, to make them want to hear his voice. And, I really do think that all is all on all of them. It's not just one. It's a bigger issue than that.
Picking up on Matt's point there, which I think is a very, very interesting one that you raised about inside the camp and what's going on there. I think what's very interesting is the fact, you mentioned there, and I agree with you, Martin, at the moment it feels that Frank is being kind of led out there to be publicly humiliated now, because on the back of leaving that stadium, which I did against West Ham United, I could just see no way how Thomas Frank was going to be allowed to step back into that stadium to manage another game in the manner in which the fans reacted to him. And look, I mentioned it in the start of the show that I do think, when I look back at certainly my time supporting Spurs and frustration towards a manager, when there's frustration over Conte or Mourinho, even the Nuno to some degree, but Frank has taken 25 times more than all those managers put together. And I agree with you. I don't think it's all his fault, but I just look back now at the man of the summer and the fact that we do know, Martin, and you're aware, there was a split amongst the fan base. There was a section of fans that maybe felt and should have got season 3 on the basis that he won the Europa League, and there may have been a cause for momentum to carry on there. Then there was, again, a big group of fans, and I would say, again, not being a hypocrite, I was part of those fans that did feel we needed to change a manager. And it's just such a shame that Frank has not been able to scale up. And I just wonder now, when you look back, Martin, at those opening press conferences, certainly that first one, maybe you look back at some of the red flags now where he kept insinuating team finished 17th, we will lose football matches. Could you see from early on, Martin, the signs that there were concerns there for you in terms of how he was going to manage the scale of the job at Tottenham? Because now looking back at this, and it's easy, hindsight's a wonderful thing, right, in reflection. This feels a lot like when Roy Hodgson stepped into Liverpool. A competent man, a competent manager, but just couldn't seem to manage a step up to a big club. No one misses the fact Roy Hodgson was a good manager, because look at the clubs that he managed. But is that similar to Frank, like you said, that he's a very good manager, but it just isn't going to work here? But what are signs there earlier, Martin, now, when you look back on reflection of his appointment?
Well, I think you have to start to think that because of what's happened since. But my view on Frank was that I'd seen the evolution of Brentford, the way he come in with a specific way of playing, got them up one way, realised that wouldn't work because they didn't have the quality of players, so became more sort of limited in the way they played just to ensure they stayed up. And then with each season, they became a more expansive side. And last year, they had goals in them. They had Mbuemo, and they were a good team to watch. They scored loads of goals. They were very exciting at home, bit open at the back, but they didn't care because they were there to have. And I thought you'd see quickly that evolution, because he's proven he could make the tactical evolution, and therefore should be able to carry that into Tottenham. And the early comments weren't exactly blow your mind exciting, but it was like, let's just get secure footing, get my foundations in, and then build from there. The problem is he hasn't built. He's just, in fact, anything he's tried to build has collapsed. There are no foundations, and there's no roof, and there's no buildings, and there's no walls, and there's no nothing. It's just it looks like an empty plot, doesn't it? Where the contractors have all gone bust, and there's nothing, and there's no work taking place, and it's been poor all the way through, and that's evident now. We don't have to be rocket scientists to look at those performances. And what I would say is, there is no point in going back to, we should have kept Postecoglou. As I said over the summer when I was on, there's a reason that he went. It's because for 18 months they've been bloody awful. And 90 minutes, which defied belief because they were still bloody awful in Bilbao, should not in any time banish the memories of the previous 19 months when they had been terrible. Ever since that Chelsea game, arguably, and certainly from the middle of that season, performances fell off a cliff. And therefore, the decision to dispense was the right decision because he hadn't learnt to adapt. And the thing I did say in the summer, I think, when I was on, was I was convinced that the change in those European away games wasn't the manager, it was the players. Well, the Van der Ven interview last month absolutely underpinned that view when he said, it was us. we went to him and told him we had to change. So it wasn't the manager, it was the players. And maybe therein lies the issue now, in that the players who were proven right at the end of last season, and they've got the trophy and the medal to prove that they were right, weren't going to be told by the new manager what to do, that they wanted to do it their way. I don't know that. I'm just surmising from what we've seen. But what you do need is for there to be some degree of respect between the players and the manager. They respect a manager who knows what he's doing normally. They want one who'll make them feel good about themselves, because they're human beings. And let's be honest, we're talking about 20-something blokes, and 20-something blokes have got egos. And if you're on 150 grand a week, I'd imagine your ego's quite high. You're a physical athlete. You want to win. That's why you don't play to lose. Looks like it sometimes, but they don't actually go out and try to lose. Very adept at losing, it has to be said, but that's not actually what they want to do. None of them want to be in a team that's falling apart, in a club that's falling apart. But that's where we've got to now. And I think it was fairly obvious from that Chelsea game, which is 3 months ago, that, to use the vernacular, they weren't having him. And that was one of the big games. It was Brentford against Chelsea had some good results. And we're used to Spurs not turning up at big away games, with the exception of Manchester City. But to not turn up at all in some of the biggest games of the season, including home matches, signifies the extent of the problem. It's a rot. It has absolutely infected the entire club, it feels to me. And probably they should have been thinking about a change earlier, which is a real shame. But I do think now that that's what would have been for the better. But we are where we are now, and that change, I think, is inevitable, and I think it's this week, and I don't see how it survives whatever happens tomorrow night.
So just to be clear, before Matt comes in there, Martin, your understanding is that regardless of against Dortmund, you'd be stunned if he's here for the Burnley game.
It's just my opinion. I mean, no one's told me that.
Yeah.
I'm doing some basic 2 + 2 = 4 maths.
Yeah.
I don't think 2 + 2 = 7. I just can't see how performances, attitude within the club, fan reaction, etc., can possibly justify not making a change. And I would love Tottenham to win 4-0 tomorrow night, and then to win 3-0 at Burnley and turn the season around and everything be fantastic. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. They'll lose. If they don't lose tomorrow night, I think 90% of the supporters will be shocked. And that's because we've now become conditioned to the reality of how awful it's been.
Spot on.
It's interesting that you bring the Chelsea game into it, because for me, that was the point where I kind of accepted this is an experiment that perhaps was worth doing, but just wasn't going to work out in the way that we approached that game, and I'd call them the cowardly tactics of kind of just hoping to draw the game 0-0. And that for me is a feeling that's kind of grown over the last few months about Thomas Frank's failure to adapt to the stature of the club, but also the quality of his players he has at his disposal. And I completely agree with you on the mentality and the ego. That is definitely a conversation to be had. But one point that I'd take in particular is a big reason for Frank's success at Brentford, of his own admission, was how he played the data. And he always spoke about XG and how he kind of trained his players where if they're on the edge of the box, they have an option for a shot, but there's a player he could lay the ball off to who might have a higher XG to pass the ball. And I think when you're managing Brentford and your players are inferior to your opposition, that's a clever way to go about it, because 11v11, 90% of the time, you're not going to beat any of the big six or a Newcastle or a Villa, whoever it is. He needed something to swing things into his favour, and I think that was a way of doing that. But now he's come to Tottenham, and with the spamming of the crosses that we're seeing, it looks as though that's still, in my eyes, the approach that he's taking. And the issue is now when your players are superior to your opposition, you should be willing to rely on their individual brilliance. You should be perhaps encouraging someone like Xavi Simons to take more shots from the edge of the box, or players to take more risks with the passes that we're making. And I really, really don't think we're seeing that, and that's a big issue for me. Do you think there's a kind of a frustration internally as well, how Frank doesn't seem to have adapted to that, and it seems though he still thinks he's coaching Brentford, but he hasn't changed how he wants to play football enough to suit where he actually is now.
Well, I mean, you watch the players, Matt, and you just wonder when they're going to show some bravery in possession, because that's what they don't do. The cautious option is always the first option, and that's on them. But at some point, it's on the manager as well, because he's got to be encouraging them to be more proactive, and it doesn't happen. And I think it feels like he's so fearful of getting it wrong and making wrong calls, and that has sort of spun out from them to him. And it looks like everyone is walking around in a sort of mental straitjacket. There's no expansion. There's no sense of joie de vivre. There's no sense of excitement when they get the chance. It's what's the safe option? Let's play it down the line, and then come back. And then we'll go inside. Oh, and there's nothing really on, so we'll go back again. And let's hope that they make a mistake. And maybe if we can play it in that channel, and we might get a corner, we might score from the corner. It's just rubbish, isn't it? You don't. I don't think Tottenham fans expect to win every week, but winning occasionally might be useful. And at the moment, there's no sign of that happening.
Compete, Martin. Compete. That's all we want. I think. Tell me if I'm wrong, Martin. Is it unfair to say that all Spurs fans would like to see their team compete? And it feels we haven't competed over two halves since Copenhagen, and then before that, maybe Man City. It's very hard to look back, and I'll let you come back in, Martin. Very hard for me to actually think of two consistent good halves of football under Thomas Frank.
Well, the fact that we've got to the middle of January and Tottenham have won no more than 2 matches in succession all season tells you that there's something seriously awry, given all the things economically that that are in the club's favour. And they went out on last week and they spent 35 million on a up and down midfielder to give them some energy. And look, Conor Gallagher is going to be a decent player, but he's only ever going to be an up and down midfielder who'll give you energy, and he'll nick 4 or 5 goals a season if he gets in the right place. And he's certainly going to get a few bookings, and he'll get the fans going and all of that. And that's good. It put that into a mix that's going the right way, and it improves what you've got. And he is competitive. Of that, there is no doubt. Bergvall is competitive. Of that, there is no doubt. And yes, look, he's been without his 3 best attacking players all season, although Solanke is now available again, but obviously not fit. And then the other attacking player is out for 3 months in Kudus, and too much went through Kudus because there was nothing else. There's been nothing on the left all season, apart from at the odd flash here and there, but not sustained. But then again, it's his choice to play a right back who hasn't got a left foot at left back for quite a bit of the season. Doesn't help, does it? I mean, Spence carries the ball, but he can't pass 10 yards with his left foot. He's one of the most one-footed footballers I've ever seen, and I think he's a decent up and down, pacey right back, but he's not a left back. And yes, we've had Udogie injured, and Davis has been out with injury, and now he's back. And sadly for Ben, given he's out of contract, it could be the last time you see him in a Spurs shirt. And he's been a brilliant servant for the club for over a decade, and that's a really sad way for him to go. And all of that, and all the injuries, etc. But a job as a manager is to find a way to get results in adversity. And we haven't seen any of that. And it's the caution, the inhibition, the lack of bravery on the ball has stood out pretty much all season at home. And from the second home game against Bournemouth, when we were totally schooled by Bournemouth, without the goalkeeper, it's 5-0. Let's be honest. It was a battle. And because we were able to play on the counter away from home, never been better results because teams come onto you, they overcommit. We had a bit of pace in Kudus, took a few chances. We had a bit of pace in Johnson. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong about Johnson being sold, but he was, let's put it this way, if Johnson had not been sold, he would definitely be starting tomorrow. Of that, there is no doubt. And probably would have been starting on Saturday as well. Last Saturday and this Saturday. So you get rid of him, and understandably, but then you get the injury in the other place behind him, and it sort of compounds the felony, doesn't it? And you end up with a situation tomorrow when there's basically 11 outfield players who have played first-team football. And I don't know how you set up a team because there's no one who can naturally play on the left, and unless Udogie is going to be thrown into action as a left-sided midfielder. It's not good. It's a mess.
Yeah, look, we're going to go for our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. Thanks to the over nearly 6,500 that are with us here on this show. I'm joined by my returning co-host from exile of the last couple of years. I've dragged him back, kicking and screaming. Matt Hayes is back alongside me. It's always a pleasure with Matt. It's effortless with Matt, which is why I love having him back alongside me. And we're joined by the superb, journalist, Tottenham Hotspur correspondent, who is, you're hearing his voice now in those press conferences. I'm not sure if he's kicking and screaming. I think he might have been coming out of that stadium on Saturday. The superb Martin Lipton is back alongside us on Last One Spurs. Love having Martin here. Martin, well, of course, we are building up to the Borussia Dortmund game, but it just feels like there's a lot to cram in with you in a very short space amount of time. I do want to touch upon next the players' dissatisfaction in terms of what we're seeing at the moment. You alluded to it there before our first break around the way in which Spence, we've seen a certain degree of dissent. Of course, Mickey van der Ven, obviously in the way those players left the field against Chelsea at the time at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. Alongside that, I don't know if anyone caught this. If those were in the stadium would have seen that. I know Matt did see it because we spoke about it on the phone before we started the show. Romero seemed to be the man that was initiating the substitutions against West Ham United, where he was seemingly interacting with, it was Frank or the set-piece coach from where I was in the South Stand. And Matt was sitting in the South Stand as well against West Ham. And it seemed that they were almost trying to initiate the subs in terms of to the bench from the players, which again screams of maybe the lack of ill discipline and trust around the squad. And what's interesting is Frank has come out on the eve of this game in which he says, and look, you're probably going to tell me, Martin, well, what else do you expect him to say? What was he going to say? He says that he feels the complete trust, the complete faith of the board. And he says he feels that he can still win back the supporters. I mean, you would think it's crazy at this point. And again, I do feel for Frank to some degree because I think he's a human shield at the moment for a lot of the anger and the frustration because there is no Daniel Levy there anymore. So he takes the brunt of that. And he's taken the brunt, I think, of the frustration that fans are feeling towards this current ownership, however they want to be branded, ENIC 2.0, the Lewis family. We're going to come to them before we end the show, but I want to ask you about the players' dissatisfaction. And Martin, if you are concerned about the level of that throughout the course of this season, and you touched upon the fact you just feel the players haven't got the respect there for Frank. Do you feel now looking back, and again, I'm going hypothetically here, it could be easier to do this, maybe on the back of winning that Europa League, and again, this is maybe on my feeling now, is that we should have maybe gone for a higher caliber of an appointment of a manager where Frank might have been the right man to bring in had Tottenham finished 17th and won no trophy. But when Spurs won that trophy, if they were going to make a managerial change, I know we all hoped and felt we wanted Frank to succeed here, but is there an argument that he just never really got the respect of the players? Because it feels from very, very early on until now, there's just been very little respect for Frank. You know, it just feels there's been a lot of dissent, more than we actually ever saw under Ange Postecoglou, bar one incident, if I remember, where you saw Maddison and, forgive me, I think it was Sonny on the bench at one point, almost like they were discussing Ange's tactics. But bar then, in that 18-month period, we saw very little dissent for Ange. But with Frank, in the space of 6 months, it's felt continuous, Martin. Unsustainable, unsurvivable.
Well, that's how it appears, isn't it? I mean, as I said, I think that a lot of those players should take a long, hard look at themselves and be ashamed. Utterly, utterly ashamed of the way they've conducted themselves. Nevertheless, they are the players. You can't get rid of them all. And It is the manager's job to find a way to make them think differently. And he hasn't done that. And it's strange because the relationship he had at Brentford with players was fantastic, as well as the relationship he had with admittedly a smaller crowd and maybe a less expectant crowd. But the relationship he built with those Brentford fans was fantastic. You could feel the energy. There is no energy now. There's diminished man. And that's really, really sad. Every time I see him, and I've seen him a few times recently, which I hadn't done as regularly before, he seems to shrink figuratively more and more. And there's not much left to shrink now because he's just a desiccated version of himself, it feels to me. There is no way of any green shoots because the whole thing is dead in terms of this moment of his managerial career. And look, maybe those players, I think actually not even maybe, those players aren't as good as they think they are. A few of them are, but not enough of them are. And those that aren't need to put in more effort. And I don't think enough of them have cared enough. They've cared enough to pick up their wages and they'd rather not lose, but they're not doing enough to make sure they don't lose. On Saturday, if you don't win the game, you sure as hell don't lose it. But then again, if you're talking about the manager getting respect, we know that Johnson was popular, so letting him go seems to have been another stick they can beat him with. I think he was right in the way he treated Bissouma, because if a bloke can't do the basics of professionalism, like turning up on time, not taking nitrous oxide, all of this nonsense, he deserves to be punished. But then you end up calling on him in adversity on Saturday. And to be fair to Bissouma, he was probably the best player in the second half. He actually, until he ran out of legs after half an hour because he hadn't played for 9 months for proper football. You know, even in the African nations, he got sent off in his first game in the first half, didn't he? He hasn't played enough football, so he was shattered after half an hour, and that's why he jumps under the chance that leads to the corner. But he was the one who got them going. But that was a sort of Hail Mary pass out of nothing. He had nobody else, and he's gone the player he absolutely ostracised for the first 6 months of his reign. And again, that's more indicative of the whole blooming mess. It's hard to find anything positive. Even last season, when we weren't doing brilliant at times, there were players who you thought, well, he's actually had a good go. Like Gray has done really well in a variety of positions. It was difficult, but you can see the growth, and you can see something in Bergwall. And then when Maddison and Kulusevski were playing, we had options. We could hurt teams. And yes, when Van der Ven and Romero were fit, look, there's been nothing this season. Nothing that makes you feel positive I can think of all season. There have been games when the odd player has played well. For 90 minutes, whilst he's not great on the ball, Vicario had actually had a good game on Saturday. He made 2 big saves in the first half. He was, the header from Mavropanos, the one from off of Souček's chest, big saves. And then
at the end, just
last season's incarnation, when he gets involved in a silly spat from a corner and then starts moaning when they score from it. Now, you could say that, look, 3 other players should have dealt with it, but he's got 2 hands. Stop messing around with Wilson. Concentrate on the bloody ball. That's your job. Get rid of it. Don't just moan about it when they score because you haven't done a proper job of gathering the corner. I mean, it's those sort of things that frustrate the hell out of just about everyone, don't they? And I have no problem at all with that decision. It was not a foul. It was a goal. Now, you could argue that recently Spurs haven't had a good decision, a big decision go their way very often, apart from possibly a couple of Romero reckless challenges. It could have been seen as more than reckless and could have been red cards. But in terms of the penalty, the Gray penalty at Brentford, PGMOL or the KMI said it actually should have been a penalty. That would have been a 1-0 win. It would have changed the mood. On Saturday, no one was appealing for the handball against Skulls, but it hit his hand, and it's in an unnatural position. And if that had been at the other end, you can bet your bottom dollar it would have been given. Because that's the way it goes sometimes, isn't it? And that's not moaning about decisions, because I am sick to the very back teeth of people moaning about decisions. You make your own luck. But at the moment, they're getting none. And that will turn, because that's the nature of the game. Whether it turns this season or next season, Spurs will start getting a few dodgy decisions their way, because that's what happens in football. There's no point in moaning about it. It is what is. But it's just been, I've sort of lost the thread now. Basically because I'm just going through what everybody else is going through as a Tottenham fan. Just misery. We're jumping on the misery express, and we know where it's going to end. Yeah. Actually, no, we don't know where it's going to end. We fear where it might end. We think it won't go all the way.
Matt, coming for us, I know again is interesting around one player.
That Mr. Clean DV7 or whatever your name is Martin going to stop talking? Well, I'm the only one being asked questions, so no. I'm not.
He's doing what he's here to do.
Can I ask Martin to keep talking so I haven't got to talk? That'd be perfect. You could talk for the remainder of the season, Martin, so I don't have to. That'd be fantastic. But I'm going to hand over to Matt. I'll let you have a breather. Go on, Matt.
I think on the point of Bissouma, one of the most alarming things for Thomas Frank, in my opinion, is in 2026, the two pleasant surprises we've got in our games has been how Bissouma performed against West Ham and how Ben Davies performed against Sunderland. And those are the two players, how I describe it, who haven't been franked yet. Because they're the players that haven't been playing, who haven't been in the squad, both for, of course, very, very different reasons. Yet, when we see the two of them come in, there was a very, very clear increase in quality and in effort and in every aspect of their game. And that, for me, is very, very damning for Thomas Frank. I also want to ask you about Mathys Tel, because there's been, of course, a lot with him in the last 3 or 4 days. Firstly, he was a bit of a bright light in that game against West Ham, looked a bit keen to make things happen more than a lot of other players on the pitch. You then have him subbed off for Dominic Solanke, a substitution that got a very, very bad reaction from the fans, and also a bad reaction from Tel himself, who was fuming when he saw that board. And then in what I think was the first of many very pointed showings from the fans was as Tel walked around, he got a standing ovation from every part of the ground that he passed. And then today we hear that he has been removed from the Champions League squad, that he had been added in to replace the injured Solanke, but now that Solanke is half fit, Tel has been removed from that squad again. We're hearing he's really unhappy about that, and Paris FC seem to have reiterated their interest in signing him this month again. What can you tell us about the situation with Tel?
Well, clearly he wants away, at least well, thanks there. To be honest, I've got not a lot of sympathy for Tel. He's been rubbish. He hasn't done enough. He flattered to deceive. Physically, he looks really impressive until the ball comes to the chance of that very early chance on Saturday. I mean, it was a terrible finish. It sent it miles into the and maybe it isn't an easy one, but he's a professional footballer. He's a striker. I mean, how many goals he scored? 3 for the club. He's got a decent goal at Bournemouth. He scored one at Leeds, and there was one against Villa last season. And there was another penalty, maybe 5 goals. But he's not a goal scorer. He just isn't a goal scorer. And I had no problem with the decision to take him off. I don't know quite why. I think at the moment, if some fans see that the player's unhappy with Frank, they think the player must be right. Because
I would say, Martin, that you come back in.
That Frank does.
Do you not feel, though, on that game on Saturday, that I feel like Mawani, I mean, what's he doing here? I mean, I don't mean it disrespectfully, but if it was the only game... that's what I mean. The only game he's really turned up for was the game in which he's playing on loan against Paris Saint-Germain, where he scored a couple of goals. But bar that, Mawani just hasn't turned up. So I think the frustration was, and I'm sure you agree, Martin, at the weekend, was that, okay, if you're going to bring Tel off, okay, but surely you don't bring Tel off for Mawani. Surely you don't bring Tel off and you're leaving Mawani out there, because that seemed to make no sense.
You'd have had to move Kolo Mawani to the left. I mean, the problem for me is Kolo Mawani ever likely to win a header against 2 big centre halves?
Not at this club.
No.
No, I don't think he wants to be here. Like you said, I don't think.
But even if he
wants to be
does
here.
want to be here, and I don't think he does, but he is not going to win an aerial challenge against those two centre halves. So why? The only one who probably could is the only two that could. Richarlison, who's obviously out for another weeks, and Solanke. And when they're desperately trying to win the game, they think, well, actually, we know that West Ham aren't very good at centre half. If you actually jump against them, so let's put on the centre forward who could jump against them, which is Solanke. If you then feel, well, actually, I'm not sure that Tell's done much. Maybe we can move Kolo Muani left and see if he can get at the right back and push the right back. That may have been the thinking. In the end, none of it bloody worked. Let's be honest, because Solanke's not fit.
No.
That's the interesting thing with this decision. Were it me, and look, it isn't me, and it's not my life. I'm just a punter. I would have had Tell play tomorrow. Not that I think he's done enough to deserve it, because there's nobody else.
Yep.
And I'd have made the swap next week, when hopefully Solanke might be able to get through 60 minutes, because I don't see how he gets anywhere near through that game tomorrow, given he's played 40 minutes, has he, in 2 games? You're asking him to play up top. He hasn't played since August. There's no way he's going to get through that game. And he's going to have, Slotterbeck and whoever else the other centre half is, kicking him up in the air, because they will do, because why wouldn't they? And he's, because he's coming back from injury, and if he overplays, he's even more likely to get another injury. So it's an interesting and odd, for me, decision. Not that it's a bad decision. I just think the timing of it's a mistake. I'd have done it one more week later, but that's just me. Solanke is a better player. He is more likely to score a goal if he's fit than any of the other forward players we've got at the club. But he's not fit. And there you are. This is the problem. And that's why the two centre halves have scored more than all the strikers put together.
Yeah.
Because there's something, none of them are good enough.
Yeah. I can also ask you, Martin, about Romero, because he was a goal scorer for us against West Ham. And I feel one of the things about Romero is, when he's not enjoying his football, when it feels that he seems to take a matter upon himself to play kind of wherever he wants. And I mean that, as I was saying it literally, but, in the last few games, we've seen Romero pretty much stroll upfield, similar to how he was under Conte, where seemingly to go rogue. Is that another indication of the lack of respect the players have for the manager? Where, look, I know he got a goal for us, and don't get me wrong, he got us back in the game, but I mentioned that earlier. For those that were in the South Stand against West Ham, they would have seen Romero having a huge amount of interaction, whether it was with Frank or the set-piece coach, about making changes to, I think, bring Bergvall on at the time. What do you make of that, Martin? Because I have a fear that we're in a situation come this summer that not only, I think, does Mickey want to go, and I look at Mickey's body language now when he comes off the field, Mickey looks like he's done. And I don't blame him, because a player of his quality and his level probably thinks, what am I doing at this football club? You had that overlap interview only a couple of months ago. I know we've got him under contract, same as we've got Romero under contract, but it just feels, because of the nature of what is happening at this club and the cycle that we're in, do you also have that fear that you find it very hard to see how Van der Ven and Romero would want to stay on at this club, despite what will be probably another managerial change in the summer? Or do you feel it's just too early to say?
It depends who the manager is. If it's Marco Silva, then they'll be wanting out. If it's Xavi or Xabi Alonso, it will be different. If it's Pochettino, I'm not sure. I think the most likely scenario is that they will try and get Pochettino back after the World Cup, because, well, he still lives in London. He wants to be back in the Premier League. He wants to be a big club. There's not many options, so Spurs is the one. And whether it will work or not is another matter, but you can see it happening. And at least he has a track record of doing well, not just at Tottenham. He's won trophies at PSG. He's a big manager. He's got this, a reputation. All of that. Whether you should, that whole thing about never go back is a fair question, and we'll see. But I do think it depends on who the manager is. If they get another version of Frank, which will be realistically, if you look at the ones in the Premier League, it's the Franks, the Glasners, because he's obviously leaving Palace, Hertzler at Brighton, to a degree, although he's a much more progressive manager on the ball, Iraola at Bournemouth or Marco Silva, you are going to see an exodus of players just because it will be an indication that the board and the club are aiming for mediocrity. Simple as that. That's how it will be perceived by the fans, and it will be how it will be perceived by the players as well. So I think, but what's clear is there has to be a dramatic overhaul of that squad anyhow. And summer's easier to do it than winter, as we know. But I do think that, you know, if they are able to bring in a blimey, as it were, manager, a crikey, that's a bold move manager, it might change the mood music around. And you want to, you know, if you had to pick your best 5 players at Tottenham, there's no doubt that Van de Ven and Romero are in the top 5 comfortably. By you know, whatever your doubts about Romero's mentality sometimes, and you know, last season he was more interested in playing for Argentina than Spurs, and I suspect we might see the same thing from March onwards this year, particularly once Spurs are safe, when he's got a World Cup coming up in the summer. And I don't blame him, because he's, you know, looking after himself and he wants to win the World Cup with Argentina, but that's not great for Tottenham. I genuinely think that we'll see a lot of it'll be a massive summer of change. But the identity of the new manager, whomever that may be, will, I suspect, become really critical and key in determining which players want to go. And that's fair enough. If Spurs' next manager is Marco Silva, then seriously, that will be an empty stadium next year.
I think I'm out.
That'll be an empty stadium.
I think we're all done. I think we're
done. That's a really important point for me, Ricky, because as a fan, I don't want to do this anymore. As a fan, I'm not going to the game tomorrow. This is the first year I've ever actually lived in England and been able to go to a lot of these games. I don't want to go anymore. And I'm really sorry to hear that. But if we as fans don't want to do this anymore, if we as fans don't want to do this anymore, imagine those players who don't have any emotional connection to the club beyond, you know, the 2 years that Van de Ven has spent here, the 3 or 4, whatever it is that Romero has spent here. Martin, do you know, are there any other players within the squad that we could be fearing this? We, of course, know Tell wants to leave, but in terms of the more higher performing players in the squad, like I'm thinking of someone maybe like a Lucas Bergvall, who has an incredible career ahead of him, provided he makes the right decisions.
Well, look, I mean, you never know. I mean, I think Porro wants away. But I don't. If someone wants to pay silly money for Porro, I'll take it. You know, he's got a good delivery on him, but I think his work ethic leaves a lot to be desired. To be honest, there aren't many I care about as a fan.
That's the problem as well. I agree.
You know, there have been other Spurs teams where you didn't want the players to leave.
Spot on.
I honestly, if the whole bloody lot of them went this summer, I wouldn't be grieving.
Yep.
I wouldn't be grieving. I mean, it'd be a bit of a struggle to fill 25 players in, but to be honest, I wouldn't mind a clean slate. I would, you know, absolute year 0. I could live with that because you might build something. At the moment, it's not just a tough watch. It's you know, you actually want to go wearing a blindfold so you don't have to watch it, do you? It's miserable. There is nothing to make you want to watch that lot at all, and it's tough. And you know, look, I pay to go and watch 3 or 4 times a season. I'm not like the majority of fans who actually pay a lot of money week in, week out, or you know, the 2 a month they can afford, whatever it might be. I get paid to go and watch. I get fed in the press room. I get the chance to sort of talk to the manager, which I thought every fan would like to say what they think to the manager. I have to couch it a bit more delicately than that, obviously, because you always do it so well.
You always do it so well.
But at times, crikey, I can think it and not say it. I'm in a very privileged position. And I don't have to go, but I'm talking to my son who's 16 now, and he told me, in May, after all we've gone through, we were sitting and watching it on the box at home, and when that final whistle goes, Dad, it's the greatest day of my life. I thought, having your mum and dad would be quite good, but apparently not. But that for him was a magical moment, and that's what you live for, those moments. But at this stage, it could be another 20 years before we have one of those, it feels. And actually, I don't think it's that. I think eventually the pure economics of Tottenham means that there'll be a different set of owners who'll do it properly. And because there's 600 million of income every year, which is far more than most clubs get, because there's 5 million coming through the gate every home match, it doesn't take a lot to get it right. But I tell you one thing, there's very little that's being done right at the moment. And that's the frustration.
Can I ask you, Martin? I know we're very, very conscious of time. I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I need to ask you about something there. You just picked up on the ownership. Look, I mean, I've laid my cards on the table now for a good last couple of years on here. Whilst I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt for many, many years, I've attended every single one of the Change for Spurs protests that there's been. I was disappointed by the turnout that was there on Saturday because, in the past, I've been someone that has whinged and moaned and really, I feel that unless you're going to come together collectively to try and force change, then nothing's going to really happen. I think I'm being kind when I say, and I know the guys over at Change for Spurs, they won't want me saying this, there's around 200, maybe 300, if that is a number. It's not going to be enough, you feel, to really, really force any genuine change at the moment. You mentioned about the ownership. Look, my gut feeling is these people aren't serious. I do not think, whatever you want to call them, ENIC, the Lewis family, I do not think these people were serious about this football club. You reported only 4, 5, 6 months ago that there's been expressions of interest from a number of numerous parties. One that was trying to get, a consortium together. Your gut feeling, Martin, at the moment, do you feel the Lewis family, ENIC, however they wish to be known, are these people serious about Tottenham, in your opinion?
No. It's all about when they take the cow to market and what price they can get for their prize heifer. And it always has been. Always has been. And they actually were able to use Daniel as the Aunt Sally, the sort of lightning rod for all the dissent. Now it's on them. And I think the way to get rid of them, if people want to do that, is not to go after the manager after tomorrow night, is to go after the board. Because chant about the board, take banners about the board, make it clear it's the board you're going after. Because those are the custodians. They're the people who make those decisions. They're the people. And look, I really like Vinay. I think he's a really decent bloke. And it may be that he's being hamstrung by things out with his control. But he's the chief exec. And he's got to take responsibility in the same way that the manager has to take responsibility. And if it's not working, if he can't persuade the board to do it right, if the ENIC, the Lewis family and the other members of the board are not willing to do what needs to be done, then get the hell out of Dodge, because it has to be. And there are plenty of potential, I won't say plenty, there are potential owners out there who would do a better job. But they've got to meet the ENIC asking price, which I suspect is north of 3.5 billion.
And that's the problem, is it? The fact that asking price being set, is that what is going to make
money,
it?
Isn't it? I mean,
it's a lot. It's a lot of money.
I've only got 3.5 quid, let alone 3.5 billion.
But realistically, with the pressure, and look, you've seen this, Martin, as well. In this recent couple of years or so, it's been spoken about on every, it feels, major TV station, every major radio station. There is more scrutiny. there is more focus on ENIC. And whilst Thomas Frank right now is getting the biggest boost probably of any Spurs manager in the last however many years, many would say he's the most unpopular manager right now ever at Spurs in the most recent modern of history. The reality is that, as we said at the start of this show, Thomas Frank is really being used as a human shield for ENIC, because whilst we are here right now, and at the time of recording for listeners on audio, this would be day 20 of the January transfer window. And so far, all we have done is sell Brennan Johnson and bring in Conor Gallagher, which is what they've balanced the books. We actually haven't improved this squad. But the conversation now has moved away from improving the squad and is focusing on the manager. And you might argue, is that what ENIC want? Is that what this Lewis family want? Do they want the conversation to be removed away from what Spurs should be doing to improve this lightweight squad that needs significant improvements to it, rather than the element of the talk around the manager? And Thomas Frank, as I've said, Frank is a problem, but is he the biggest of problem right now? That's the question, Martin, isn't it?
I think he's the most obvious problem in that.
And the easiest one to change.
And but I think whilst he is there, everything is about him. Once he goes, which, as I said, I suspect is inevitable, then the other questions get asked. There's not going to be enough done, is there? What you're going to end up with, a couple of panicky signings on deadline day, possibly? Probably a striker because Solanke's gone down again, or whatever it might be. And I hope not. I want Solanke to play every game between now and the end of the season and score 12 goals. But I can't see it, just because he's been out for 4 months and he's likely to break down again at some point, just because he's now going to have to be overplayed because there's no other option. So we're going to end up with a couple of panicky signings, and it won't really work, but they'll muddle their way through to a glorious 16th place finish. 1 place better than last year. Hurrah! In 16 years' time, we'll be champions on that basis.
Martin, just on that, I know Matt's going to ask you a question, but are you actually concerned, Martin, that if we don't arrest the current form that we're in, and thanks to Mario here, a regular viewer and listener to the show, Mario says we're currently 10 points from 18th. That'll be slashed to 4 or 5 points come the end of the February fixtures, potentially. People need to realise we are in serious trouble. Do you still feel, Martin, there is 3 worse sides than Spurs this season? Will that, I think some fans are concerned, that win for West Ham at the weekend, does that give them a spark to really fight a comeback here? Or do you feel, you've said it in the earlier part of the show, you think Frank is going to go eventually, whether it's after Dortmund, just before Burnley or after Burnley, Spurs are going to make a change? Can you still see, 3 wins that we need with a couple of draws in there to keep us safe? Are you concerned about a potential relegation battle here?
Yes, but not panicking yet, with the accent on yet.
So you are concerned, but you're not panicking?
Oh, we've got to be, because at the moment they're in relegation form. Over the last 15 games, it's relegation form. Fortunately, the clubs below Tottenham are also in relegation form. And it may be that 10 points is enough of a gap. And as I said, it is not inconceivable that Tottenham get relegated. It remains at this juncture, with 16 games to go, unlikely. In 6 games' time, it might become more likely.
It's insane. It's insane having a conversation like this. Go on, Matt. Sorry, go for it.
In the last 4 games,
should shut up according to some of the comments. It's fair view, and I can't really argue with that, actually.
Go on, Matt. Sorry.
I'm just looking at some of the numbers there on that point that you're making. In the last 4 games, we're 18th in the form table, behind both Wolves and West Ham. When you look at those fixtures that are coming up, one of you mentioned the run of February fixtures that we have.
You can, if you want, Matt. We can show them.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we have Burnley, which is turning into a relegation 6-pointer at this point. We then have another Champions League game. We most likely look at the table of the Champions League. We'll end up with another playoff to play in the Champions League, and then we've City, United, oh God, Newcastle, Arsenal, Fulham, who beat us at home. Liverpool are in there. I would say I am confident that we will be closer to the relegation zone at the end of that run of fixtures than we are now. Now, whether that is 10 points becomes 9 or 10 points becomes 1, we'll have to wait and see how that goes. But I just don't see where points are going to come from in those fixtures, whether it is Thomas Frank or Johnny Heitinga or anybody else in the dugout. And it's terrifying. I take solace in the point that you made earlier, Martin, that maybe 2 wins and 2 draws or whatever, because of those points we picked up at the earlier stage of the season, it could just be 4 or 5 results that we need to actually be safe. But the fact that we're sitting here in January with the money that this club has spent recently, with the money they spent on managers as well, not just on transfers, it is absolutely crazy. And then you have to ask the question, what are they willing to do in the next 2 weeks to reinforce that squad, for whatever manager is going to be there, to make sure that we have, for me, the main issue, the goals in the team to actually go and get results. I looked at our home Premier League games this season. We've had 11 home Premier League games. 8 times we've failed to score more than once. That's only 3 games at home in the league this season we've scored 2 or more goals, against Brentford, against Burnley, and against Manchester United. Only 2 of those we actually won. There's no goals in there. If I'm an attacker looking at what my next option could be, if Tottenham come knocking, I'm looking at players like Matthias Tell, who had a big, not when he left Bayern, but at a time was said to have a big future. Kolomuani, who has not done it at Tottenham, but definitely has quality. I'm also looking at the sheer numbers that are there, especially when Maddison and Kulusevski come back into form. I'd have no confidence that Tottenham will be a good step for my career. Do you think there's any hope, Martin, A, that the club will try and bring in a signing that can really move the needle up there, and B, that they actually would be able to convince someone to come in?
The money will be able to convince most people. In the end, Premier League clubs, big Premier League clubs, can offer the wages that no other league, other than the top 1 or 2 clubs in that league, can pay. And therefore, you can get players just because of that, the financial side. Even if you only get them there for 18 months and they move on, they'll come for the dough. That's what's always been, really. I mean, even more so now. Tottenham could pay, if they wanted to, 250 grand a week for someone, if they were that desperate, if they wanted to persuade them. Whether they'd want to is another matter. Whether they do it in January, another matter again. I think it again depends on who is the manager in the summer. So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Have they got the desire to do that? A far bigger question, I'd say.
I need to ask you quickly, Martin. I want to quickly ask you about Pochettino. Then we're going to close on Dortmund and where we are going into that game. You mentioned about Pochettino earlier. You feel the club may look to try and bring him back to the club come the summer. I don't know whether you can give any insights as to how this would even work, because we were talking about this on the show a couple of days ago with Poch, that he's contracted with the US for the World Cup. The World Cup, forgive me here, runs into quite, large amounts of the summer, towards the end of the summer. So when you're talking about bringing Pochettino in, where whoever comes in here, we're already saying it, there's going to be players that are going to want to go. There's going to need to be players that you're going to need to bring in. It feels like for Pochettino, he's coming back to do exactly the same job that he's done before. And therefore, you probably feel for Poch, he would need to come in at a very early point in the summer, identify who he does want, identify who he doesn't want, and then have pre-season to kind of then work out what his squad looks like. But in reality, when you look at the World Cup and how that's going to play out, Martin, is that even a possibility, given the nature of how this World Cup will play out this summer?
He lives in London. He watches the Premier League, whether on the telly or in the flesh most weeks. He knows exactly what's going on. He'll know exactly which players. Look, assuming this is based on the assumption that he's offered the job and wants.
Of course.
Were he to be offered the job, there would be an understanding that it couldn't happen until the US go out of the World Cup, which realistically, last 16 probably gives you first week in July, which is 6 weeks before the season starts.
Right.
And he's working in international football. Most of the year's a holiday anyhow.
Do you think that the US would allow him to have any kind of distraction to be able to sign some form of pre-agreement with a club? Because they have
needed, does it? If it's agreed, it'll be you'll hear. You can just do it, can't you? They can't stop him once he's out of contract.
I'm only asking you because I just feel like with America, they've plunged so much money into this World Cup that they would not allow any distraction, or do you just feel doesn't matter? There's ways around that.
Look, I just don't think they announce anything. If the deal is in place, everyone keeps still on it until it's over. But we've had it before. I mean, I remember Scolari was going to go to Chelsea. Everyone knew it, but no one would say it.
Yeah.
That was in 2008, if you remember. It happens a lot.
I'm just thinking, though, because of the fan mood right now, and I don't know if you agree, Martin, it's the lowest I've actually ever known it as a Tottenham fan in terms of the lowest. I'm thinking how fans right now would be able to somehow rationally keep calm, would potentially have to renew their season ticket before you know who the next manager is going to be. That's why I raise these concerns about how would fans...
Yeah, I get that, but my thought would be, and I might be wrong, if they're not obviously going and talking to anybody else in June and July, it's pretty obvious who they're talking to.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be, if there wasn't lots of talk about X or Y, then it's obviously Z. And Z is the bloke who's been here before.
Personal choice, Martin. Would Pochettino be your man that you'd want to take over if it's in the summer for you? I'm talking to you as a fan now with a journalist hat off. Is Pochettino the man you would want to come in the summer for you?
I wouldn't be opposed, but nor would I be desperately excited. So, but that doesn't mean that I don't think it could work. I just don't know. I don't know how. He'd have to start. He would coming in to a far worse place than he did in 2014.
Yep.
Because albeit when he came in 2014, he didn't know that he was going to be given a generational talent on a plate, which is what happened. He was handed the best English striker, perhaps of all time, out of which he didn't. And when he signed, he had no idea about it.
He didn't even know it himself.
Yeah. So there may be somebody else develop, and suddenly, maybe next year it's going to be Mikey Moore and Williams Barnett and the Irish boy they've signed. I don't know if he's
Mason Melia, yeah.
Well, no, suddenly you might have 3 or 4 who make the jump, and it changes the dynamic of the whole squad. I don't know. That's the hope. And what we do know is that he was a horse whisperer as a manager. He got those players to believe in themselves. Kyle Walker would not, even though he had a fallout at the end with Pochettino, would not have become what he was.
Agree.
Without the jump he made under Pochettino. I don't think, because he was he became a much more confident player because of Pochettino. Did Dyer ever play as well under anybody else? No. You go through all of those players, pretty much the majority of them had their best football under that manager. So maybe he can work the magic again. Or it needs someone completely different. And maybe, that's the way they go. All I want is to see a manager who can make the players and the fan base and the club feel unified again. And it was unified in the Pochettino days. There was those 2 or 3 years before it started to go a bit stale for a variety of reasons, when nobody had any doubt about the identity of everything regarding Tottenham Hotspur. And tell me now what the identity of this Tottenham Hotspur is.
There isn't
because one. I cannot see one.
No, there isn't. There isn't. Matt, I know we want to quickly ask Martin a question and we're going to close on Dortmund, if that's okay, Martin. Matt, I'll fire to you.
Yeah, and I want to start by saying I completely agree with your thoughts and feelings on Pochettino coming back. I think I don't have faith that it would work, but I know that it would make me happy because of what Pochettino did in the past. And I'm the age where that was the Tottenham team that I fell in love with. And when football became probably a bit too important in my life, it was because of Pochettino and the football that he was playing. Also think it's important to add on to your point that he got Harry Kane. He also is in the only period of Tottenham where the recruitment somehow was absolutely incredible, and he had the Belgian wall at the back in Vertonghen and Alderweireld. He had Eriksen and Ali and Son, and a lot came together for him that allowed him to be as good as he was, but he still had to do it, and he still had to make it effective and make it work, and he certainly did that more than any other Tottenham manager I've seen in my lifetime, on a consistent basis. So I would definitely have that nostalgia, that would be happy to see him come back. But in the managers that the fans are talking about more than anything else, the likes of Xavi Alonso. Do you think there will be a desire, maybe not a desire, but a reality within the board that they think they can actually go and get a manager of that caliber and of that ilk? Because more so year on year, the job is looking like a poison chalice. And for someone like Alonso, who was so successful at Leverkusen and then had the really awful tenure at Real Madrid that he did have, he has a point to prove, and he also has potentially the option of waiting for the Liverpool job for the summer if things keep going the way they're going with Arne Slot. So do you think that there's any scenario where the board actually believe they can attract someone of that caliber?
Well, you've got to give it a crack, haven't you? I mean, I still think that it's more likely that Alonso will go to Liverpool, because I think Slot maybe dispensed with at the end of the season. But there is this thing about loyalty at Liverpool. And if he finishes in the Champions League space, given all that's gone on this season, and of course the whole season has been in the shadow of what happened with Diogo Jota, that perhaps there's more willingness to give him a turn. If that door is shut, then Xabi Alonso looks to see which doors are open. Likewise, all the other major managers. You know, if Nagelsmann decides to walk away from Germany, maybe he comes back into the frame, for example. What does Tuchel do? Is he going to go to United, or are they going to go for somebody else? What if he wants to go back into club football? All of these options are there. If you don't ask, you don't get, I would say. Doesn't mean you're going to get if you do ask, but if you don't ask, you definitely won't. It's that, the old thing about, you can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket. And therefore, they've got to be buying some tickets and hoping that some of them turn up gold. But at the moment, why would you, as a world-class manager, want to come into a club which doesn't appear to have any actual ambition to be a world-class club?
In your mind, is there any scenario where Arne Slot reunites with Johnny Heitinga next season at Tottenham? Or I guess there's going to be a bit of bad blood there with how he used us for the Feyenoord contract.
Well, I mean, who knows, actually? I wouldn't be totally dismissive of that if it happened. If that's the way it was, because Heitinga's work at Ajax wasn't great as a manager, but as a coach, he seemed to do quite well. But I mean, you look at Liverpool last year, and it's still, every time I look back, I think of it more as Klopp's second title rather than Slot's first. All he did was move Gravenberch in the midfield, and he also had Salah's greatest ever season. And if you've got a player who scores 30 and makes 20, you've got a good chance of winning the league, haven't you? So all of that is difficult. I don't know. If I knew, I'd probably be putting money on it, and I wouldn't be here now. Realistically. But look, I just think it's been so poor that just anything will be a change. But please not another from the same bottle.
Yeah. So look, we are going to very quickly ask you, Martin, about Dortmund coming up. Obviously, Frank took the press conference earlier today, or for listeners on audio yesterday, in which he said they are a little bit limited in terms of who Spurs can fill because they've only got 11 first-team players available. He said the players need the support against a very good German side, because if we keep the support, then magic can happen. Again, he reiterated, like we said in the earlier part of the show, there is backing and support. He had lunch with Johan Lang, Vinay Venkatesham, and Nick Boycha, and he said it's all good and it's part of the media circus when asked to address the speculation. He said about fans backing, not backing. He said, look, it's not about me. It's about supporting the team, supporting the players, and I'm happy to take the blame as long as everyone supports the players. If your back is against the wall, then you fight, and that is what I need to do. It's not about me. We need to win football matches, and we need to win together. He said his players haven't been available enough this season, so it's been more difficult, but we still need to find a way. And he was asked about what they are doing, and he said, there's a lot of signs that it's going the right way. We are much closer than we think. We just need to keep going. Martin, what are you expecting against Dortmund, where we've got, as things stand, 11 first-team players available? I think, forgive me, Dortmund are on a good run themselves, domestic-wise, in the Bundesliga. And Thomas Frank is going to be out there on the touchline for, as we expect, probably, and like we discussed, maybe the last time as Spurs head coach. Are you giving us any hope, Martin, for tonight for this game?
No. No. I mean, look, I could be wrong. I'd love to be wrong, but 2-1, 3-1 Dortmund, they're just better. And they're not great. I mean, actually, they're in a decent season. They look worse than they do because Bayern are winning the league by so much. But actually, their points tally's been pretty decent. They need to win as well. To have any chance of finishing the top 4, Dortmund have to win this game tomorrow night. In the same way that top 8, rather. In the same way that Spurs, to get in the top 8, have to win both games. So do Dortmund. So they're going to come and they're going to fancy themselves, no doubt about it, and they probably win because they're in a far better state anyhow.
Yeah.
Before the injuries, I mean, the team tomorrow pretty much picks itself, except we haven't got anyone to play on the left, so you may have to play Kolo Muani on the left to play Solanke, because Solanke's now got to play because Tell doesn't play. So it's Odeberg on the right, or spin them the other way, and Xavi at 10, and then Bergvall and Gray because they're the only 2 midfielders who are fit. Because Pape Sarr, if he's back yet from African nations, it was ill anyhow, so we didn't play in the final, and I doubt he's back because they only won it last night, so he won't be involved. And you've got Porro, Danso, Romero, and Spence. That's it. The only other option is Scarlett. I mean, there isn't too much to play for, and he's not going to play any of the kids because that's not in his nature. We've seen that. So yeah,
Martin,
how do you get a win with that team?
But just to ask you, as a journalist and your coverage of football, in the amount of years you've covered football in your profession, have you ever known situations like this, like the one we're going through, where the manager, who it appears that every single fan has lost complete confidence in the game before, that most of the stadium are singing, you're getting sacked in the morning, is taking the game, and as we keep on saying, being used as a really human shield for this? I just don't understand the logic with this. It's illogical. I just don't understand why we are doing this. With an opportunity to try and give some form of a lift to a group of players that we know are limited. There's, I think, no fewer than 15 players out. What are we trying to achieve here, Martin?
I don't know. This is why I'd have pulled the plug. I said I think it's actually
ridiculous,
unfair to put him through it. I think it's like bear baiting. I just don't see the rationale, but that's a decision that they've taken.
Yep.
It feels like they're looking for the final justification for the decision that they know they're going to make. And I just don't think it's particularly right or good or fair. But football isn't right or good or fair when you don't play well. And it will be a horrible atmosphere. Of that, there is no doubt.
For those that are going.
No positivity
Yep.
at all. It'll be a grim, grim night from start to finish. And at the end, he'll be answering the same questions he's answered after the last few games. Do you think you're going to be sacked? And this time, he'll know the answer, the real answer, even though he won't give that answer.
Finally, to close, if it is going to be Johnny Heitinger till the end of the season, do we have concerns, Martin, this might be another Stellini type situation where you're asking someone to take the team, but in reality, the players don't perform for that person? Is that a concern?
Well, at least they haven't heard his voice before this week. Whereas Stellini, they had heard his voice. And they thought he was just another version of bad cop.
Yep.
When Conte had thrown him under the bus. To be fair to Frank, he has gone out of his way not to throw these players under the bus.
Agree.
When perhaps he might have done. So I don't think there's any animus towards Heitinger because he's not been part of the regime for long enough, and in any respect, they may listen, and at least he has got a track record as a player. He played at the highest level, etc. All of that, and also they don't want to get relegated, so maybe that will get them through. But I honestly, I don't know anymore.
This is a social experiment, isn't it?
Can we just fast forward to June, please? Promise me 15th, and let's fast forward to June.
I wish we could. I really wish we could hit the fast forward button. Before we say goodbye to you, Matt, thank you ever so much. We've brought Matt out of exile. I know we'd bring him back occasionally in the odd 6 months. Matt, you've been an absolute star. Thank you ever so much for coming back. Matt, thank you. Have you perversely enjoyed it at all, Matt? Barring the Spurs conversation?
You know, the awful thing about having been kind of doing Spurs content for the last 6 years is the majority of it has been really, really bad, and I've learned to take these shows as therapy. So I do feel a lot better now than I did before the show, that's for sure. But yeah, like I said, I'll always answer the call, Ricky, and I'm delighted to be able to share the screen with Martin as well and hear his thoughts and his insight into the goings on. I just hope next time it's a little bit more positive.
Matt, you've been a superstar. And Martin, I know there's a lot of suggestions in the comments that we've had here in this live broadcast that it's great to see somebody that, although working in the press, you can see the Spurs passion in them come through. And I know how much you do love this football club, and you wrote books on this club and follow this football club so closely as you do. Now, back in some of the press conferences, the fact of the matter is at some point, Martin, this is going to turn right. But my biggest concern is that I worry it's going to get even worse before it gets better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, tomorrow night is going to be the worst. It's going to be horrible. I'm not looking forward to it in any way, shape, or form. Maybe we'll be surprised for the better. Maybe they turn up and get a result. Everything fantastic, but I don't see that. It's going to be difficult, and then Saturday's not going to be any easier. And then we've got some harder games. Oh gosh. I suppose the thing I always think to myself is one of the lessons in life is that things, well, no matter how things are, they're never as bad as you think or as good as you feel. And so maybe it's the former this time. It might not be as bad as it feels, but my God, it feels bad. And Frank was talking in answer to my question actually on Saturday. Not was a good question, but he came up with a good answer to a degree. Talking about turning the super tanker around. The trouble is, it's still heading for those rocks, and the skipper's commands don't appear to be listened to by the bloke who's actually at the wheel. Yeah. And the rudder it doesn't appear to be moving, and it isn't being turned around, and that's why there has to be the change. There has to be the sacrificial offering. It's always the manager, and that's unfortunate.
Yep.
But that's where we are. And tomorrow, maybe things are different. I genuinely cannot see Thomas Frank being on the coach that arrives at Turf Moor on Saturday, whatever happens tomorrow.
Yeah, I hate to agree with you on this case, but I think I have to. Look, thanks again to the over 7,500, 8,000 that have been with us throughout this show. And for those that will be travelling to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium tonight for listeners and audio, support the team, get behind them. We know it's going to be a very, very difficult game in store, with all due respect what Spurs are at this moment in time. And like I said, hopefully we at some point will get back some form of a connection that we know about this football club. But I have that great fear, like I've said consistently on this show, and I've said for many, many months now, that I think where we are under this ownership, I don't think anything is going to change. So look, let's hope at some point that we recognise Spurs once again. But I want to say again, a massive thank you to Matt, to the wonderful Martin Lipton. We have been the last one on Spurs. Thank you ever so much for your support. Keep safe, keep well. And as always, come on you Spurs.